I'm going to let you on a secret. You can appreciate, enjoy, and even understand art with very little or no art history. And if you stick around, I'll show you how. Welcome to Be With Art. I am Marie. I am a New York-based art program developer and a professional museum educator leading tours at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And with Be With Art, I am offering you to engage with some of the Met's greatest masterpieces, regardless of your background in art history. Don't get me wrong, I'm an art historian, and art history is a wonderful discipline. But it is not all there is to engaging with art. And when you go to a museum or look at pictures online, you shouldn't feel that you must run to Wikipedia or read 500 pages on the artist before you can understand their works. If you have eyes attached to a brain, which I suspect you do, and a little time on your hands, I am inviting you to discover your innate capacity to read a painting. All it takes is looking time and a few tricks, and you'll be amazed at how much you can see when you take the time to look. Then you decide if you want to dig into art history. And I can help with that too. Today, I'm inviting you to engage with the work of Jan Van Eyck. Here it is at the Met, smack in the middle of the room in its own glass case. You notice that there are two paintings in the case because the painting we'll focus on is on a panel of a set of two. On the right is the Last Judgment, and on the left, the panel we'll focus on today is a crucifixion. Van Eyck painted it around 1420 on a wood panel 22 by 7 inches. It's a small painting. Why this painting, you may ask? Because in this painting, Van Eyck did more to modernize painting than Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci combined. And I can even add that without this painting, there might not have been a Leonardo da Vinci. Got your attention now? Good. So now let's look at it. There are many ways to look at a painting. Today I'm going to offer two ways. The first one is purely intuitive. The second one is more structured. Let's start with the intuitive looking. Just look at it. You probably recognize some of the figures. You probably also recognize the scene. What strikes you the most in the painting? What surprises you? Ask yourself questions while looking at the figures and the space. What is that space? What are these people doing? How can you tell? Do you have questions about what the artist has done? Be curious. Ask yourself questions. Try to answer them. If you can't now, write them down. Keep them for later. At this point, you can stop the video and take the time to look and reflect on these questions before you listen to my own insight. I posted a high-resolution JPEG of the painting under the video. Open it on your computer. You'll see a lot better than on the video. In my eyes, the first striking element of this painting is its narrow format. The other striking element is how packed it is, with people, horses, and all kinds of details. If you look closer, you are even more amazed at the realism. It looks like the painter is trying to include everything that was there on that day. down to the individual stones on the ground. The space is oddly represented. All these figures seems to be on a hilltop, but it is hard to tell if the figures that are at the bottom of the painting are lower on the hill or closer to us. Most figures, from the woman in the front to the horseman at the foot of the crosses, seem to be the same size. And then suddenly behind the crosses we see a landscape and a city far in the distance, very far. When looking at the horseman at the center, we see a lot of different facial expressions: sneering, laughing, smiling. Some are interacting, some are looking up at Jesus. The group at the bottom is different. There is sadness and desperation and silence. So just by observing, and whether or not we know the story told in the gospel, we can tell that there are two distinct groups. A rowdy crowd that seems either indifferent or jubilant towards the agony of Jesus, and further down, a silent group reacting to the crucifixion with despair. Some of you may have already recognized Virgin Mary in blue and John holding her as she collapses, as well as Mary Magdalena on the right in the green dress with her long flowing hair. Earlier, I mentioned that I would introduce two ways of looking: the intuitive look and a more structured look. The intuitive look is great for a warm-up. You get to familiarize yourself with the painting. The intuitive look is scattered. It doesn't really teach you a lot about what the artist did and why, but it should tell you at least if you're interested or not to explore the painting further. And by exploring the painting further, I mean to understand the artist's process. In other words, to read the artist's visual language. I will start with what I see as two strong elements of the composition: the rows and the diagonals. As chaotic as the scene may appear at first, with all these figures crammed in a very narrow space, upon closer examination we can notice a structure. The most obvious division is in 3 rows or registers. The bottom register contains the crying women, the middle register contains the rowdy crowd, and the top register contains the crosses. Although the 2 lower registers are packed, they are separated by an empty spot where the ground is visible. But we can go much further. This is the bottom register that we can divide again in 3 sub-registers. We find that all the heads except that of Mary are in the top sub-register, and Mary's is isolated in the middle sub-register. The middle register is where most of the crowd is. If we divide it in 3, in the bottom sub-register, we'll see soil. The middle sub-register contains mainly horses, and the top sub-register contains mainly heads. And we can do the same thing with the top register. The lower sub-register contains the landscape, the mid sub-register, the bodies, and the top sub-register, the sky. This is not all. Let's look at those sub-registers. The heads of the crowd, 3 more sub-registers. At the bottom right, mainly faces and profile. In the middle one, in the center, people seen from the back. And in the top one, people facing us. Now let's look at the top register. The bottom sub-register is divided in 3. At the bottom, barren land, which is a kind of a transition. In the middle, the sky. At the top, the mountains. And now the middle sub-register. At the bottom, the sponge of vinegar. In the middle, the head of the thieves and Jesus' wound. And at the top, Jesus' head. The subdivisions increase its number as one gets closer to the cross. They are also clearer, which is one of the ways Van Eyck gives the illusion of distance in the group without using perspective, but we'll go back to this a little later. The rigorous composition in parallel registers of equal size doesn't look stiff and contrived because Van Eyck has positioned vertical elements to connect those horizontals. That's what I call the vertical connections. At the bottom register, the scene is flanked by 2 standing figures, one facing us, the other one facing the crosses. They connect the lower group to the upper one. The 2 men with their back to us also create a transition between the lower group and the crowd. The middle register is connected to the upper one by the central cross, but also by the spears. The other reason why the eye doesn't read this painting as a succession of horizontal registers or rows is because of two very powerful obliques, which happen to be the square's diagonals. These dominate the two lower registers, which guide our eyes and carry the narrative. Diagonals in a painting usually convey energy, action, emotion, and movement. And this is what we see here. From bottom right to top left of the lower square, if we read it from left to right, the diagonal goes down, following the direction in which Mary seems to be falling. But if we read it from right to left, it leads the eyes from the group of the women to the woman in red looking away. This woman connects to the next registers and marks the point where the next diagonal starts to follow the march of the horsemen up the hill towards the crosses. Or the diagonal picks up where the last one ends, on the bottom right of the top register, and follows the tilt of the legs of the thief across Jesus' chest and parallel to the tilt of his head. So far, we've looked at the way the surface of the panel was organized with horizontal registers, connecting verticals, and strong dynamic diagonals. There is a lot more to this masterpiece by Van Eyck. One of the most endearing aspects is its spatial organization, on how the painter manages to give us the illusion of depth with and without perspective. There is also the way he painted the panel. And this is what makes this work such a fascinating piece. This is one of the very first examples of an oil painting and realism in art. If you want to learn more about what makes this little panel a watershed in the course of Western art, go to my Patreon account, and with as little as a contribution of $1 a month, you'll gain access to the full video for this presentation and to my upcoming Engage With videos. Thank you. See you there.